POV Italian Cooking in association with Simply Good Food TV, where today we're going to make Pane al Pomodoro. It's also known as tomato bread. Now, before we get started, just take a quick second and click on the subscribe button in YouTube and download that Simply Good Food TV app. So my love affair with cooking bread continues. This is going to be one in probably a series of videos where I'm making different breads. The tomato bread is one of my favorite. This tomato bread, which really is a bit of a misnomer, it's really sun-dried tomatoes, it's not fresh tomatoes, but it really packs a flavorful punch because in addition to the sun-dried tomatoes, it also has sauteed shallots and garlic. Now, in addition to being just a great bread to eat, this bread is also kind of very visually appealing. The bread itself is pinkish, almost orange in color, and it contrasts nicely against the burgundy pieces of sun-dried tomato that are spread throughout the bread. This bread is so easy to make, but it tastes so good. I mean, we've made this bread before, and we've kind of used it as a standalone meal where we'll stand there with a little bit of butter while it's still warm, eat 3 or 4 pieces. We've kind of used it as a side to a main dish, and kind of as a snack. So there's just so many uses for this bread. It tastes so good that I'm not going to take up any more of your time. Let's take a look at the ingredients and start making this Pane al Pomodoro. We're going to use 3 3/4 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour. Real important, as I talked about in the last video, that you use unbleached all-purpose flour. We're going to use 1 pack of the instant rise yeast, 2 teaspoons of salt. We are going to use 2 tablespoons of very finely chopped shallots, 1 clove very finely chopped of garlic. We are going to use 1/3 cup to 1/2 cup of sun-dried tomatoes. We're also going to reserve the oil. You buy the oil-packed sun-dried tomatoes. We're going to reserve a tablespoon of the oil that will go in this as well. And then at the end, we're going to use 1 egg to glaze the loaf before it goes in the oven. Now, this recipe does make 1 loaf. So what I've already, and 1 1/4 cup of warm water. That warm water I've already put in my mixing bowl. I've already put some yeast in there, so by the time we get around to dumping in all of our ingredients, our yeast will be ready. First thing we're going to do, I'm going to kind of move things around here real quick. We need to chop up our sun-dried tomatoes. That should be close. I'm going to grab 1 more. If I chop up too many, no harm, no foul. Because this recipe, since it only makes 1 loaf, I'm actually going to make 2 loaves of this bread. So as soon as I stop filming, or cut away, I'll just go ahead and chop up what I need for my 2nd loaf. That is probably about good enough. Let me scrape off my knife. Looks pretty good. We got those chopped up nice and small. Let's see if I guesstimated good enough here on. This is a 1/2 cup. Looks like I guessed perfectly. One thing we need to do is lightly saute our shallots and our garlic. Through the magic of editing, I've already done that. So I've got pretty much everything ready to go. Let me check my yeast here. My yeast needs just 1 more minute, maybe 2. So when this is ready to go, we'll be back. One other thing I need to do, my 2 teaspoons of salt. I want to kind of just stir this into my 3 3/4 cups of unbleached all-purpose flour. You don't really need to do it this way. I just kind of do it just because I want to ensure that my salt gets evenly distributed throughout my flour. So there we go, that should be good enough. Yeast is ready to go. Now what do? Got my paddle on my trusty dusty KitchenAid. Let's lock her down. Start this slow. We are going to first dump in our 2 tablespoons of shallot, 1 clove of garlic that we have lightly sauteed. Let the paddle break that clump up and get that all going around in there. Then we're going to take our 1/3 cup to 1/2 cup of sun-dried tomatoes that we've chopped up, dump them down in there, let that get mixed up. Now, we are going to take 1 tablespoon of the oil from our sun-dried tomatoes and dump that in there. Now, the great thing about using the oil from the sun-dried tomatoes is that you're going to see that it makes our flour, our dough, almost orange in color. So it's really cool. It looks really neat when we get it done here. All right, so now let's get our dough dumped in. Our flour, because we want to make it into dough. Let's get that all dumped in. Nice and slow. You just don't want to end up at, just do one big pour. Kind of let your mixer keep up. Probably went a little too quick there. Good enough for government work. We'll let the paddle do as much as it can do. That is about it. Let's turn this off. We're going to get this paddle off and put our dough hook on and let it finish this job for us. All right, dough hook on. Lock her down. I'm going to start it on just on speed 2. What we want to see happen here is we want to see this dough come together into a nice ball. If it doesn't, it's probably too dry. And the reason, measuring flour by volume is not an exact science. We talked about that in the last video. Sometimes you got to throw a little bit more water, maybe a little bit more flour. This is not coming together like I would like to see it. Yeah, let's see what happens here. I want to stop this real quick. I want to feel my dough. I want to see my dough feels dry. And I'll tell you what, that dough feels a little bit dry. If your dough feels dry, I'll just grab this. I'm going to take just a little bit of water. Doesn't take much. I'm going to turn this beast back on, lock it down, turn it back on number 2. We're just going to drizzle this water in. I think I might have had 2 tablespoons of water there, and a lot of times that's all you need. Now it's going to take a second for that to get all worked in there. We do not want to overwork this dough. All right, it's not coming together the way I want it. Sometimes it won't, especially when you add water late, because what it really does is it kind of lubricates the outside of your dough. And rather than getting it kneaded, it just kind of spins around. I'm going to get a little bit of flour on both my hands because the outside of this dough is a little wet since I put that water in late. Pull it off the dough hook. Let's get it over here and see how it feels when we pick it up with our hands. Oh, that's going to be, actually, you know what, that's what it needed, was just that little bit of water. Now you'll see when I work my dough, especially when I just added water late in the game, I kind of roll it in itself. That way we get that wet outer layer kind of worked into the middle. All right, let's give this a quick knead. Again, it doesn't need much kneading. You can see here I kind of push away, I pull back, I spin, I push away, I pull back, I spin. That is all this needs. What I'm going to do is get everything covered up, get it off to the side, go ahead and make my other loaf of this, and when this first rise is done, after an hour, we'll be back, we'll talk about the second rise. You can see that our tomato bread, or our Pane al Pomodoro, actually sun-dried tomato bread, has pretty much doubled in size, which is perfect. It's been about an hour, generally about how long it takes for this dough to double in size. Now, before I start messing around with this dough, I want to talk about my oven real quick, how I've got things set up. I'm going to grab my other camera here, my little GoPro, and walk over here to the oven real quick. What I've got is my baking stone on the second lowest rack, and then I move my other rack clear to the bottom with a sheet metal pan. This is a quarter size sheet metal pan. The reason I do that, bread goes here on the stone, and then I'll pour a half a cup of water in right when I put the loaves in, close the oven very quickly. That will steam the dough and make that nice crust. If you don't have a baking stone, you can just use a sheet metal pan. Let's talk about our dough. You can do this in a round loaf or a long oblong loaf. I like to just do this bread in an oblong loaf for no reason other than that's what I like to do. So let's take this bread, and we're not going to work it too much. Just kind of punch it down. And while I'm punching it down, I'm just going to kind of stretch it into a nice kind of rectangular shape. And then what I'm going to do is kind of fold that over, fold this size over, because what we want that nice smooth look to the top of our dough, just like that. Tuck it under. Not really worried what the bottom looks like, because as it rises, it's going to fill in. There won't be any voids under there. I'm going to take a piece of my parchment paper here. I like this pop-up parchment. It's real easy to work with, and you just, when you want one, you grab it real quick. All right. Gonna lay that loaf on there. This is gonna rise for about an hour. What I like to do to help my dough rise properly, dough needs two things to rise. It needs warm temperature and it needs moisture. So I've got a little tea towel here. I'll run hot water over it, wring it out real good. I'll drape the towel over it. I'll probably reheat the towel every 15 minutes. You don't really need to do that. It's just, I did it the first time and it worked for my dough, and I'm a creature of habit, so I'm going to do it every time. So my dough's ready. We're going to let that go for a half hour. I'm sorry, we're going to let that go for an hour. But in a half an hour, we're going to turn our oven on to 425. That way it'll have a full half hour to heat up before we need to put our loaf in there. So when we get back, the dough will be risen and we'll be ready to throw this in the oven and bake it, because it smells so good and I just can't wait to taste it. It's been an hour. Let's take a look. You can see our loaves have expanded. Man, they look great. Now you will see here that I'm wearing my GoPro, back to the old school days, but that's just because I'm going to be getting in and out of the oven and I don't have a good angle with my camera. So we're ready to get these in the oven. What do we need to do? First, our oven has been warming up at 425 degrees for a half an hour. What we're going to do is, I already had one egg white here in my bowl. I'm just getting a second, ready to go. Now I'm going to spin around here real quick, get just a drop of water. You can see just a little splash of water, and we're going to whip this together, because what we're going to do is we are going to brush our wonderful loaves with a little bit of egg white, and that's going to give them a real pretty color when they're in the oven here. All right, first thing we're going to do, take a razor blade or a really sharp knife, and we're going to score our bread. We're going to just do 3 diagonal scores through our bread here. We want to do them relatively deep. This is going to allow some air to escape. It's going to allow our bread to rise. And you can get really fancy with these if you want. Like you can see I just did 3 large diagonal scores here. You can also do, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll spin it around. We'll do these other side in that angle. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to come out the way I want it. 4, 5. And you'll see when we take these out of the oven, they'll have a slightly different look to them because we scored them a little differently. You'll also see that I trimmed my parchment paper up, just kind of slashed it real quick. And that's just because my baking stone's not real big and I don't want the parchment paper to overlap the bread. I'm just not to the point where I feel comfortable like sliding it off my pizza peel right onto the stone. So I kind of leave it on the parchment paper. It doesn't really matter. All right, so I'm going to take my egg white here, brush these really, really good with my egg white. I'm going to get these in the oven. Take my pizza peel. If you don't have a pizza peel, you can use the back of like a sheet pan. Having a pizza peel is real easy, makes this job much more simple. So now we'll go over to our oven here. I'm going to throw this loaf in. Grab our second loaf. Get that in the oven. Now I am going to take a cup of water and pour that on my sheet pan down here. We'll hear it steam and boil. Quickly close our oven. Now what we're going to do is we're going to come back in about 5 minutes and put another half cup of water in that sheet pan. Then at the end of 10 minutes from right now, we're going to lower our oven temperature to 375. We're going to let this bake for another 25 to 30 minutes. So we'll lower it to 375 after 10 minutes and then bake for another 25 to 30 minutes. And we'll keep an eye on it. My tomato bread is done baking. I've got the GoPro on again so I can get it out of the oven, get a nice view of that. So let's get this bread out and take a look. Bread has a real nice color to it. Get it up out of here. Wow, look at that. It looks tasty. Looks just like we expect it to. Get this parchment paper out of the way. The parchment paper just pulls right away once the dough starts to set. This one's a little bit ugly. This one turned out real nice, as you can see. But you know what? It's not about how it looks, it's about how it tastes. We're going to let these cool down a little bit, then we'll cut the ugly one here and give it a taste. Our wonderful tomato bread has cooled enough for us to give it a try. I can't wait. I love this bread. I've made it before. I always like to cut the heel off and then taste the next slice. Now this bread, letting my knife do the work, you'll see it has a slightly yellow, almost orange tint. Oh my gosh, I love the way this bread smells. It's definitely not your traditional, white bread. It's not a French bread. It's not a white bread, but I'll tell you what, this bread is packed full of flavor. I've had it before, but let's see how this loaf turned out.
It's good.
You can hear that slight crunch from the crust. I mean, it's not a super heavy crust, but you get a quick crunch. You can hear my cat meowing and hitting my vertical blinds. With flavor, you get just a hint from those shallots, just a hint from that garlic. That sun-dried tomato is your top flavor. Oh my gosh. Can't eat. This bread is outstanding. I so highly recommend it. I'm going to let the cat out. This is definitely a bread I recommend making. Give this a shot. It's an easy one. And with that, thank you so much for watching POV Italian Cooking. Follow us on all the major social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Google+. Most importantly, click that subscribe button in YouTube and download that Simply Good Food TV app so you can watch all of our episodes there and watch some other wonderful cooking shows from other chefs around the world. Thank you so much for watching, and ciao.